The Immortal. Chapter 1. As everybody knows, the great majority of Americans, upon reaching the age of natural selection, are elected to the American Institute of Arts and Ethics, which is, so to speak, the Ellis Island of the Academy. Occasionally, a general mobilization of the Academy is ordered, and from the teeming population of the Institute, a new Immortal is selected for the American Academy of Moral Endeavor by the simple process of blindfolded selection from who's which. The motto of this most stately of earthly institutions is a peculiarly modest, truthful, and unintentional epigram by Tupper. Unknown, I became famous. Famous, I remain unknown. And so I found it to be the case. For when at last I was privileged to write my name, Smith, Academician, I discovered to my surprise that I knew none of my brother Immortals, and, more amazing still, none of them had ever heard of me. This latter fact became the more astonishing to me as I learned the identity of the other Immortals. Even the president of our great republic was numbered among these Olympians. I had every right to suppose that he had heard of me. I had happened to hear of him because his Secretary of State once mentioned him at Chautauqua. It was a wonderfully meaningless sensation to know nobody and to discover myself equally unknown amid that matchless companionship. We were like a mixed bunch of gods, Greek, Norse, Hindu, Hottentot, all gathered on Olympus, having never heard of each other, but taking it for granted that we were all gods together, and all members of this club. My initiation into the Academy had been fixed for April 1st, and I was much worried concerning the address which I was, of course, expected to deliver on that occasion before my fellow members. It had to be an exciting address, because slumber was not an infrequent phenomenon among the Immortals on such solemn occasions. Like dozens of dozing Joves, a dull discourse always set them nodding. But always under such circumstances, the pretty ushers from Barnard College passed around refreshments. A suffragette orchestra struck up. The ushers uprooted the seated Immortals and foxtrotted them into comparative consciousness. But I didn't wish to have my inaugural address interrupted. Therefore, I was at my wits' ends to discover a subject of such exciting scientific interest that my august audience could not choose but listen as attentively as they would listen from the front row to some deathless stunt in vaudeville. That morning I left the Bronx rather early, hoping that a long walk might compose my thoughts and enable me to think of some sufficiently entertaining and unusual subject for my inaugural address. I walked as far as Columbia University, gazed with rapture upon its magnificent architecture, until I was as satiated as though I had arisen from a banquet at Child's. To aid mental digestion, I strolled over to the noble home of the Academy and Institute at adjoining Mr. Huntington's Hispano-Moresque Museum. It was a fine, sunny morning, and the Immortals were being exercised by a number of pretty ushers from Barnard. I gazed upon the impressive procession with pride unutterable. Very soon, I also should walk 2 and 2 in the sunshine, my dome crowned with figurative laurels, cracking scientific witticisms with my fellow inmates, or perhaps squeezing the pretty fingers of some, but let that pass. I was, as I say, gazing upon this inspiring scene on a beautiful morning in February, when I became aware of a short and visibly vulgar person beside me, plucking persistently at my elbow. "Are you the great academician, Professor Smith?" he asked, tipping his pearl-colored and somewhat soiled bowler. "Yes," I said condescendingly. "Your description of me precludes further doubt. What can I do for you, my good man?" Are you this here Professor Smith of the Department of Anthropology in the Bronx Park Zoological Society? He persisted.
What do you desire of me?
I repeated, taking another look at him. He was exceedingly ordinary. Prof, old sport, he said cordially, I took a slant at the papers yesterday, and I seen all about the big time these guys had when you rode the goat.
Rode what?
When you was elected. Get me? I stared at him. He grinned in a friendly way.
The privacy of those solemn proceedings should remain sacred. It were unfit to discuss such matters with the world at large, I said coldly.
I get you, he rejoined cheerfully.
What do you desire of me? I repeated. Why this unseemly apropos?
I was coming to it, Professor. I'll be frank. I need money.
You need brains.
No, he said good-humoredly. I've got 'em, plenty of 'em. I'm overstocked with ideas. What I want to do is to sell you a few.
Do you know you are impudent?
Listen, friend, I seen a piece in the papers as how you was to make the speech of your life when you ride the goat for these here guys on April 1st.
I decline to listen.
1 minute, my friend. I want to ask you one thing. What are you going to talk about? I was already moving away, but I stopped and stared at him. That's the question. He nodded with unimpaired cheerfulness. What are you going to talk about on April the 1st? Remember, it's the hot air party of your life. Remember that each and every paper in the United States will print what you say. Now, how about it, friend? Are you up in your lines?
Swallowing my repulsion for him, I said, Why are you concerned as to what may be the subject of my approaching address?
There you are, Prof, he exclaimed delightedly. I want to do business with you. That's me. I'm frank about it. Say, there ought to be a wad of the joyful in it for us both.
What?
Sure, we can work it any old way. Take Ting and Company, the typewriter people. I'd be ashamed to tell you what I can get out of them if you'll mention the Ting typewriter in your speech.
What you suggest is infamous, I said haughtily.
Believe me, there's enough in it to make a financial coup, and I ask you, Prof, isn't a financial coup respectable?
You seem to be morally unfitted to comprehend.
Pardon me. I'm fitted up regardless with all kinds of fixtures. I'm fixed to undertake anything. Now, if you'd prefer the Bunsen baby biscuit bunch, my old man Bunsen would come across.
I won't do such things, I said angrily.
Very well, very well. Don't get riled, sir. That's only one way to build on Fifth Avenue. I've got 100,000 other ways.
I don't want to talk to you.
They're honest, some of them. Say, if you want a strictly honest deal, I've got the goods. Only it ain't as easy, and the money ain't as big.
I don't want to talk to you.
Yes, you do. You don't realize it, but you do. Why, you're fixin' to make the holler of your life, ain't you? What are you gonna say? Hey, what you aimin' to say to make those guys set up? What's the use of upstaging? Ain't you willin' to pay me a few plunks if I divulge to you the most startling phenomena that has ever electrified civilization since the era of P.T. Barnum?
I was already hurrying away when the mention of that great scientist's name halted me once more.
The little flashy man had been tagging along at my heels, talking cheerfully and volubly all the way. And now, as I halted again, he struck an attitude, legs apart, thumbs hooked in his armpits, and his head cocked knowingly on one side. Prof, he said, if you'd work in the Ting Company, or fix it up with Bunsen to mention his baby biscuits as the most nutritious of condiments, there'd be more in it for you and me. But it's up to you.
Well, I won't, I retorted.
Very well, he said soothingly. Then look over another line of samples. No trouble to show 'em, none at all, sir. Now, if P.T. Barnum was alive.
I said very seriously, the name of that great discoverer falling from your illiterate lips has halted me a second time. His name alone invests your somewhat suspicious conversation with a dignity and authority heretofore conspicuously absent. If, as you hint, you have any scientific information for sale which P.T. Barnum might have considered worth purchasing, you may possibly find in me a client. Proceed, young sir."
"Say, listen, Prof, I've got the goods. Don't worry. I've got information in my think box that would make your kickin' speech the event of the century. The question remains, do I get mine?"
"What is this scientific information?"
We now had walked as far as Riverside Drive. There were plenty of unoccupied benches. I sat down, and he seated himself beside me. For a few moments I gazed upon the magnificent view. Even he seemed awed by the proportions of the superb iron gas tank dominating the prospect. I gazed at the colossal advertisements across the Hudson, at the freight trains below. I gazed upon the lordly Hudson itself, that majestic sewer which drains the Empire State, bearing within its resistless flood millions of tons of insoluble matter from that magic fairyland which we call upstate to the sea. And, thinking of disposal plants, I thought of that sublime paraphrase, "From the Mohawk to the Hudson, and from the Hudson to the sea." "Bo," he said, "I gotta hand it to you. Them guys might have got wise if you had worked in the Ting Ting Company or the Bunsen stuff. There was big money into it, but it might not have went." I waited curiously. "But this here dope I'm startin' in to cook for you is a straight, reliable, and honest pill. P.T. Barnum, he would have went 1,000,000 miles to see what I seen last January down in the Coquina country."
"Where is that?"
"Say, that's what costs you money to know. When I put you wise, I'm due to retire from active business. Get me?"
"Go on."
"Sure. I was down to the Coquina country I was doing rubes. I gotta be honest with you, Prof. That's what I was a-doing of. Selling farms underwater to suckers. Beautiful Florida. Own your own orange grove. 7 crops of strawberries every winter in God's own country. Get me?" He bestowed upon me a loathsome wink. Well, it went big till I made a break and got in Dutch with the Navy Department, which was surveying the Everglades for a safe and sane harbor of refuge for the Navy in time of war. Sir, they was a-dredging up the farms I was selling, and the suckers heard of it and squealed something fierce, and I had to hustle. Yes, sir, I had to get up and mosey cross lots. And what with the federal government chasing me one way, and them rubes and the sheriff of Pickalocka County racing me the other, I got lost for fair. Yes, sir." He smiled reminiscently, produced from his pockets the cold and offensive remains of a partly consumed cigar, and examined it critically. Then he requested a match. "I shall now pass over lightly, or in subdued silence, the painful events of my flight," he remarked, waving his cigar and expelling a long squirt of smoke from his unshaven lips. "Suffice it to say that I got everything that was coming to me, and then some, what with snakes and mosquitoes and briars and mud and hunger and thirst and heat. Wasn't there a wop named Pizarro or something what got lost in Florida? Well, he's got nothing on me. I never want to see the damn state again, but I'll go back if you say so." His small rat eyes rested musingly upon the river. He sucked thoughtfully at his cigar, hooked one soiled thumb into the armhole of his fancy vest, and crossed his legs. "To resume," he said cheerily, "I come out one day, half nude, onto the banks of the Miami River. The rest was a pipe after what I had went through. I trimmed a guy at Miami, got clothes and railroad fare, and ducked. Now, the valuable portion of my discourse is this here partial information concerning what I seen, or rather, what I run onto during my cruel flight from my relentless persecutors. And these here is the facts. There is, contrary to maps, coast survey guys, and general opinion, a range of hills in Florida made entirely of coquina. It's a good big range, too, 50 miles long, anywhere from 1 to 5 miles across. And what I got to say is this. Into them there coquina hills there still lives the expiring remains of the cavemen." "What?" I exclaimed incredulously. "Or," he continued calmly, "to speak more strictly,
the few individuals of that there expiring race is now totally reduced to a few women.
Your statement is wild.
No, but they're wild. I seen 'em. Being extremely beautiful, I approached nearer, but they hove rocks at me, they did, and they run into the rocks like squirrels, they did, and I was much too on the blink to stick around whistling for dearie. But I seen 'em. They was all dolled up in the skins of wild animals. When I see the first one, she was eating onto a ear of corn, and I nearly catched her, but she run like hell and all. Yes, sir, just like that. So next I looked for some cave guy to waltz up and paste me, but no. And after I went through them damn Coquina Mountains, I realized that there was nary a guy left in this here expiring race, only women, and only about a dozen of them. He ceased, meditatively expelled a cloud of pungent smoke, and folded his arms.
Of course, said I with a sneer, you have proofs to back your pleasant tale.
Sure, I made a map.
I see, said I sarcastically. You propose to have me pay you for that map.
Sure.
How much, my confiding friend?
10,000 plunks.
I began to laugh. He laughed too.
You'll pay him if you take my map and go to the Coquina Hills, he said.
I stopped laughing. Do you mean that I am to go there and investigate before I pay you for this information?
Sure. If the goods ain't up to sample, the deal's off.
Sample? What sample? I demanded derisively. He made a gesture with one soiled hand, as though quieting a bulky horse.
I took a snapshot, friend. You want to take a slant at it?
You took a photograph of one of these alleged cave dwellers.
I took 10, but when these here cave ladies hove rocks at me, the films was put on the blink, all except in this one, which I developed and printed.
He drew from his inner pocket a photograph and handed it to me. The most amazing photograph I ever gazed upon. Astounded, almost convinced, I sat looking at this irrefutable evidence in silence. The smoke of his cigar drifting into my face aroused me from a sort of dazed inertia. Listen, I said, half-strangled. Are you willing to wait for payment until I personally have verified the existence of these, creatures?
You betcha. When you've went there and saw the goods, just let me have mine if they're up to sample. Is that right?
It seems perfectly fair.
It is fair. I wouldn't try to do a scientific guy. No, sir. Me without no education, only brains. Fat chance I'd have to put one over on a academy sport what's chock-a-block with Latin and Greek and scientific stuff and all like that.
I admitted to myself that he'd stand no chance.
Is it a go? He asked.
Where's the map? I inquired, trembling internally with excitement.
Ha ha, he said. Listen to my mirth. The map is inside here, old sport. And he tapped his retreating forehead with one nicotine-stained finger.
I see, said I, trying to speak carelessly. You desire to pilot me.
I don't desire to, but I gotta go with you.
An accurate map.
Can it, old sport? An accurate map is all right when it's pasted over the front of your head for a face. But I wear the other kind of map inside me conch. Get me?
I confess that I do not.
Well, get this, then. It's a cash deal. If the goods is up to sample, you hand me mine then and there. I don't deliver no goods F.O.B. I shows 'em to you. After you have saw them, it's up to you to go round 'em up. That's all, as they say when our great president pulls a gun. There ain't going to be no shooting. Walk out quietly, ladies.
After I had sat there for fully 10 minutes staring at him, I came to the only logical conclusion possible to a scientific mind. I said, You are, admittedly, unlettered. You are confessedly a chevalier of industry. Personally, you are exceedingly distasteful to me. But it is useless to deny that you are the most extraordinary man I ever saw. How soon can you take me to these Coquina Hills?
Give me 24 hours to fix things, he said gaily.
Is that all?
It's plenty, I guess, and say.
What?
It's a strictly cash deal, get me?
I shall have with me a certified check for $10,000. Also, a pair of automatics. He laughed.
"Huh," he said. "I could loco your cabbage palm soup if I was that kind. I'm on the level, Professor. If I wasn't, I could get you in about 100 styles while you was blinking at what you was a-thinking about. But I ain't no gunman. You hadn't ought to pull that stuff on me. I've give you your chance. Take it or leave it." I pondered profoundly for another 10 minutes, and at last my decision was irrevocably reached. "It's a bargain," I said firmly. "What's your name?" "Sam Mink. Write it Samuel onto that there certified check, if you can spare the extra seconds from your valuable time." Chapter 2. On Monday, the 1st day of March, 1915, about 10:30 a.m., we came in sight of something which, until I had met Mink, I had never dreamed existed in southern Florida, a high range of hills. It had been an eventless journey from New York to Miami, from Miami to Fort Coquina, but from there, through an absolutely pathless wilderness as far as I could make out, the journey had been exasperating. Where we went I do not know, even now. Sawgrass and water, hammock and shell mound, palm forest, swamps, wildernesses of water oak and live oak, vast stretches of pine, lagoons, sloughs, branches, muddy creeks, reedy reaches from which wildfowl rose in clouds, where alligators lurked or lumbered about after stranded fish, horrible mangrove thickets full of moccasins and water turkeys, heronry more horrible still, out of which the heat from a vertical sun distilled the last atom of nauseating effluvia. All these choice spots we visited under the guidance of the wretched Mink. I seemed to be missing nothing that might discourage or disgust me. He appeared to know the way, somehow, although my compass became mysteriously lost the first day out from Fort Coquina. Again and again I felt instinctively that we were traveling in a vast circle, but Mink always denied it, and I had no scientific instruments to verify my deepening suspicions. Another thing bothered me. Mink did not seem to suffer from insects or heat. In fact, to my intense annoyance, he appeared to be having a comfortable time of it, eating and drinking with gusto, sleeping snugly under a mosquito bar, permitting me to do all camp work. The paddling, as long as we used a canoe, and all the cooking too, claiming, on his part, a complete ignorance of culinary art. Sometimes he condescended to catch a few fish for the common pan. Sometimes he bestirred himself to shoot a duck or two, but usually he played on his concertina during his leisure moments, which were plentiful. I began to detest Samuel Mink. At first I was murderously suspicious of him, and I walked about with my automatic arsenal ostentatiously displayed. But he looked like such a miserable little shrimp that I became ashamed of my precautions. Besides, as he cheerfully pointed out, a little coontie soaked in my drinking water would have done my business for me if he had meant me any physical harm. Also, he had a horrible habit of noosing moccasins for sport, and it would have been easy for him to introduce one to me while I slept. Really, what most worried me was the feeling which I could not throw off that somehow or other we were making very little progress in any particular direction. He even admitted that there was reason for my doubts, but he confided to me that to find these Coquina hills was like traversing a maze. Doubling to and fro among forests and swamps, he insisted, was the only possible path of access to the undiscovered Coquina hills of Florida. Otherwise, he argued, these Coquina hills would long ago have been discovered. And it seemed to me that he had been right when we at last came out on the edge of a palm forest and beheld that astounding blue outline of hills in a country which has always been supposed to lie as flat as a flabby flapjack. A desert of saw palmetto stretched away before us to the base of the hills. Game trails ran through it in every direction like sheep paths. A few moth-eaten Florida deer trotted away as we appeared. Into one of these trails stepped Samuel Mink, burdened only with his concertina and a box of cigars. I, loaded with 70 pounds of impedimenta, including a moving picture apparatus, reeled after him. He walked on jauntily toward the hills, his pearl-colored bowler hat at an angle. Occasionally he played upon his concertina as he advanced. Now and then he cut a pigeon wing. I hated him. At every toilsome step I hated him more deeply. He played Tipperary on his concertina. "See him, old top?" he inquired, nodding toward the hills. "I'm a man of my word, I am. Look at him. Take him in, old sport, and remember, each and every hill is guaranteed to contain one bona fide cave lady, what is the last vanishing traces of an extinct and disappearing race." We toiled on, that is, I did, bowed under my sweating load of paraphernalia. He skipped in advance like some degenerate 20th century faun, playing on his pipes the unmitigated melodies of George Cohan. "Watch your step," he cried nimbly, avoiding the attentions of a ground rattler, which tried to caress his ankle from under a saw palmetto. With a shudder, I gave the deadly little reptile room, and floundered forward, a prey to exhaustion, melancholy, and red bugs. A few buzzards kept pace with me, their broad black shadows gliding ominously over the sun-drenched earth. Blue-tailed lizards went rustling and leaping away on every side. Floppy, soft-winged butterflies escorted me. A strange bird, which seemed to be dressed in a union suit of checked gingham, flew from tree to tree as I plodded on, and squealed at me persistently. At last I felt the hard coquina underfoot. The cool blue shadow of the hills enveloped me. I slipped off my pack, dumped it beside a little rill of crystal water which ran sparkling from the hills, and sat down on a soft and fragrant carpet of hound's tongue. After a while I drank my fill at the rill, bathed head, neck, face, and arms, and feeling delightfully refreshed, leaned back against the fern-covered slab of coquina. "What are you doing?" I demanded of Mink, who was unpacking the kit and disengaging the moving picture machine. "Getting ready," he replied, fussing busily with the camera. "You don't expect to see any cave people here, do you?" I asked with a thrill of reviving excitement. "Why not?" "Here?" "Certainly. Why, the first one I seen was a-drinking into this brook." "Here, where I'm sitting?" I asked incredulously. "Yes, sir, right there. It was this way. I was lying down, trying to figure the shortest way to Fort Coquina, and wishing I was nearer Broadway than I was to the equator, when I heard a voice saying blub blub, muck a muck, and then I seen two cave ladies come softly stealing along." "Where?" "Right there, where you're a-sitting. Say, they was lookers, and they come along quiet, like two big-eyed deer, kinder nosing the air and listening. Gee whiz, thinks I, Long Acre ain't got so much on them dames. And at that, one of them wore a wildcat skin, and that's all, and a wildcat ain't big, and the other, she sported palm-leaf pyjamas. So when they don't see nothing around to hinder, they just lays down flat and takes a drink into that pool, looking up every swallow like little birds listening and kinder thanking God for a good square drink. I knowed they was wild girls soon as I seen 'em. Also, they says to one another, blub blub, kinder softly. All the same, I seen wilder ladies on Broadway, so I took a chance where I was squatting behind a rock. So says I, "Hi there, sweetie, blub blub, have a taxi on me." And with that, they's on their feet, quivering all over and nosing the wind. So first I took some snapshots at 'em with my bijou camera. Guess they scented me all right, for I seen their eyes grow bigger, and then they give a bound and was off over the rocks, and me after 'em. Say, that was some steeplechase, until a few more cave ladies come out of them rocks above us and hove chunks of coquina at me. And with all that dodging and ducking of them there rocks, the cave girls got away. And I seen 'em and the other cave lady scurrying into little caves. One whisked into this hole, another scuttled into that, bing, all over. All I could think of was to light a cigar and blow the smoke in after the best-looking cave girl, but I couldn't smoke her out, and I hadn't time to starve her out. So that's all I know about this here prehistoric and extinct race of vanishing cave ladies. As his simple and illiterate narrative advanced, I became proportionally excited, and when he ended,
I sprang to my feet in an uncontrollable access of scientific enthusiasm. Was she really pretty? I asked. Listen, she was that peachy. Enough, I cried. Science expects every man to do his duty. Are your films ready to record a scene without precedent in the scientific annals of creation? They sure is. Then place your camera and your person in a strategic position. This is a magnificent spot for an ambush. Come over beside me. He came across to where I had taken cover among the ferns behind the parapet of Coquina, and with a thrill of pardonable joy, I watched him unlimber his photographic artillery and place it in battery where my every posture and action would be recorded for posterity if a cave lady came down to the water hole to drink. It were futile, I explained to him in a guarded voice, for me to attempt to cajole her as you attempted it. Neither playful nor moral suasion could avail, for it is certain that no cave lady understands English. I thought of that too, he remarked. I said blub blub muck a muck to 'em when they started to run, but it didn't do no good. I smiled. Doubtless, said I, the spoken language of the cave-dweller is made up of similarly primitive exclamations, and you are quite right in attempting to communicate with the cave ladies and establish a cordial entente. Professor Garner has done so among the simian population of Gaboon. Your attempt is most creditable, and I shall make it part of my record. But the main idea is to capture a living specimen of a cave lady, and corroborate every detail of that pursuit and capture upon the films. And believe me, Mr. Mink, I added, my voice trembling with emotion, no academician is likely to go to sleep when I illustrate my address with such pictures as you are now about to take. The police might pull the show, he suggested. No, said I, science is already immune. Art is becoming so. Only nature need fear the violence of prejudice, and doubtless she will continue to wear pantalettes and common-sense nighties as long as our great republic endures. I unslung my field glasses, adjusted them, and took a penetrating squint at the hillside above. Nothing stirred up there, except a buzzard or two wheeling on tip-curled pinions above the palms. Presently, Mink inquired whether I had lamped anything, and I replied that I had not. They may be snoozing in their caves, he suggested, but don't you fret, old top. You'll get what's coming to you, and I'll get mine. About that check, I began, and hesitated. Sure, what about it? I suppose I'm to give it to you when the first cave woman appears. That's what. I pondered the matter for a while in silence. I could see no risk in paying him this draft on sight. All right, I said, bring on your cave-dwellers. Hour succeeded hour, but no cave-dwellers came down to the pool to drink. We ate luncheon, a bit of cold duck, some coontie bread, and a dish of palm cabbage. I smoked an inexpensive cigar. Mink lit a more pretentious one. Afterward, he played on his concertina at my suggestion on the chance that the music might lure a cave girl down the hill. Nymphs were sometimes caught that way, and modern science seemed to be reverting more and more closely to the simpler truths of the classics, which, in our ignorance and arrogance, we once dismissed as fables, unworthy of scientific notice. However, this Broadway faun piped in vain. No white-footed dryad came stealing through the ferns to gaze, perhaps to dance, to the concertina's plaintive melodies. So, after a while, he put his concertina into his pocket, cocked his derby hat on one side, gathered his little bandy legs under his person, and squatted there in silence, chewing the wet and bitter end of his extinct cigar. Toward mid-afternoon, I unslung my field glasses again and surveyed the hill. At first I noticed nothing, not even a buzzard. Then, of a sudden, my attention was attracted to something moving among the fern-covered slabs of Coquina, just above where we lay concealed. A slim, graceful shape, half-shadowed under a veil of lustrous hair, which glittered like gold in the sun. "Mink!"
I whispered hoarsely. "One of them is coming! This indeed is the stupendous and crowning climax of my scientific career." His comment was incredibly coarse. "Give me the dough," he said, without a tremor of surprise. Indeed, there was a metallic ring of menace in his low and entirely cold tones as he laid one hand on my arm. "No welchin'," he said, "or I put this whole show on the bum." The overwhelming excitement of the approaching crisis neutralized my disgust. I fished out the certified check from my pocket and flung the miserable scrap of paper at him. "Get your machine ready," I hissed. "Do you understand what these moments mean to the civilized world?" "I sure do," he said. Nearer and nearer came the lithe white figure under its glorious crown of hair, moving warily and gracefully amid the great coquina slabs. Nearer and nearer, until I no longer required my glasses. She was a slender, red-lipped thing, blue-eyed, dainty of hand and foot. The spotted pelt of a wild cat covered her, or attempted to. I unfolded a large canvas sack as she approached the pool. For a moment or two she stood gazing around her, and her close-set ears seemed to be listening. Then, apparently satisfied, she threw back her beautiful young head and sent a sweet wild call floating back to the sunny hillside. "Blub, blub," rang her silvery voice. "Blub, blub, muck-a-muck." And from the fern-covered hollows above, other voices replied joyously to a reassuring call. "Blub, blub, blub." The whole bunch was coming down to drink. The entire remnant of a prehistoric and almost extinct race of human creatures was coming to quench its thirst at this water-hole. How I wished for James Barnes at the camera's crank. He alone could do justice to this golden girl before me. One by one, clad in their simple yet modest gowns of pelts and garlands, 5 exquisitely superb specimens of cave girl came gracefully down to the water-hole to drink. Almost swooning with scientific excitement, I whispered to the unspeakable mink, "Begin to crank as soon as I move." And gathering up my big canvas sack, I rose, and, still crouching, stole through the ferns on tiptoe. They had already begun to drink when they heard me. I must have made some slight sound in the ferns, for their keen ears detected it, and they sprang to their feet. It was a magnificent sight to see them there by the pool, tense, motionless, at gaze, their dainty noses to the wind, their beautiful eyes wide and alert. For a moment, enchanted, I remained spellbound in the presence of this prehistoric spectacle. Then, waving my sack, I sprang out from behind the rock and cantered toward them. Instead of scattering and flying up the hillside, they seemed paralyzed, huddling together as though to get into the picture. Delighted, I turned and glanced at Mink. He was cranking furiously. With an uncontrollable shout of triumph and delight, I pranced toward the huddling cave girls, arms outspread as though heading a horse or concentrating chickens. And, totally forgetting the uselessness of urbanity in civilized speech as I danced around that lovely but terrified group, "Ladies," I cried, "do not be alarmed, because I mean only kindness and proper respect. Civilization calls you from the wilds. Sentiment, pity, piety propel my legs, not the ruthless desire to injure or enslave you. Ladies, you are under the wing of science. An anthropologist is speaking to you. Fear nothing. Rather, rejoice. Your wonderful race shall be rescued from extinction, even if I have to do it myself. Ladies, don't run." They had suddenly scattered and were now beginning to dodge me. "I came among you bearing the precious promises of education, of religion, of equal franchise, of fashion." "Blub, blub," they whimpered, continuing to dodge me. "Yes," I cried in an excess of transcendental enthusiasm, "blub, blub. And though I do not comprehend the exquisite simplicity of your primeval speech, I answer with all my heart, blub, blub." Meanwhile, they were dodging and eluding me as I chased first one, then another, one hand outstretched, the other invitingly clutching the sack. A hasty glance at Mink now and then revealed him industriously cranking away. Once I fell into the pool. That section of film should never be released, I determined, as I blew the water out of my mouth, gasped, and started after a lovely, ruddy-haired cave girl, whose curiosity had led her to linger beside the pool in which I was floundering. But run as fast as I could, and skip hither and thither with all the agility I could muster, I did not seem to be able to seize a single cave girl. Every few minutes, baffled and breathless, I rested, and they always clustered together, uttering their plaintively musical blub-blub, not apparently very much afraid of me, and even exhibiting curiosity. Now and then they cast glances toward Mink, who was grinding away steadily, and I could scarcely retain a shout of joy as I realized what wonderful pictures he was taking. Indeed, luck seemed to be with me so far, for never once did these beautiful prehistoric creatures retire out of photographic range. But otherwise, the problem was becoming serious. I could not catch one of them. They eluded me with maddening swiftness and grace. My pauses to recover my breath became more frequent. At last, dead beat, I sat down on a slab of coquina, and when I was able to articulate, I turned around toward Mink. "You'll have to drop your camera and come over and help me," I panted. "I'm all in." "Not quite," he said. For a moment, I did not understand him. Then, under my outraged eyes, and within the hearing of my horrified ears, a terrible thing occurred. "Now, ladies," yelled Mink, "all on for the fine ally. Upstage there, you red-headed little spot crabber, Mabel. Take the call. Now smile, the whole blooming bunch of you." What was he saying? I did not comprehend. I stared dully at the 6 cave girls as they grouped themselves in a semicircle behind me. Then, as one of them came up and unfolded a white strip of cloth behind my head, the others drew from concealed pockets in their kilts of cat fur little silk flags of all nations and began to wave them. Paralyzed, I turned my head. On the strip of white cloth, which the tallest cave girl was holding directly behind my head, was printed in large black letters, "Sunset Soap." For one cataclysmic instant, I gazed upon this hideous spectacle. Then, with an unearthly cry, I collapsed into the arms of the nicest-looking one. There is little more to say. Contrary to my fears, the release of this outrageous film did not injure my scientific standing. Modern science, accustomed to proprietary testimonials, had become reconciled to such things. My appearance upon the films in the movies in behalf of Sunset Soap, oddly enough, seemed to enhance my scientific reputation. Even such austere purists as Guilford, the Cubist poet, congratulated me upon my fearless independence of ethical tradition. And I had lived to learn a gentler truth than that, for the pretty girl who had been cast for Cave Girl number 3. But let that pass. Arhibenda est injecando moderatio,